Good afternoon. My name is Michele Nicole Johnson of Ujima Genealogy of Coastal Georgia, and welcome to From Enslavement to Freedom, the Saga of Butler Island, presented by Coastal Georgia Genealogical Society and Ujima Genealogy of Coastal Georgia, a network of genealogists researching African-American families. This afternoon, we will hear presentations by 3 family historians who are actively researching and sharing the story of the enslaved people of Butler Island in McIntosh County, Georgia. Brian Sheffey, Tiffany Young, and Terri Ward all have connections to this region, and they will each tell their story and their research from different perspectives using genealogy techniques, as well as oral history and storytelling in the West African tradition of the griot. But first, let's set the stage and give you a sense of place, a sense of where Butler Island is geographically as well as historically. Okay. Butler Island is one of the barrier islands along the lower Atlantic coast in a region known as the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor, which spans from roughly Wilmington, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida. The Gullah Geechee are the descendants of the enslaved people who worked on rice, indigo, and Sea Island cotton plantations within the corridor. But Gullah Geechee is also a culture, a language, a music, foodways, spiritual expression, and all rich with many African retentions. And Gullah Geechee is also a history of resilience. For those of us who live in the lower coastal region of Georgia along the 100-mile coast, Butler Island is a familiar sight on the scenic route between Brunswick and Darien, Georgia, along US Highway 17. It is along this beautiful stretch of road where you'll see rice fields and marsh with grass that's green and lush in summer, and in the winter is yellow and reminiscent of African savannas. For those of us who don't know the history of Butler Island, you've probably seen the tall brick rice mill tower on the side of the road, which us locals call the chimney, and the old Houston house built in 1927 as you travel along the mouth of the Altamaha River. From the 1700s until the 1800s, Butler Island was the site of a large rice plantation owned by the Butler family of South Carolina and Philadelphia. The family patriarch was Major Pierce Butler, who was the absentee master and landlord of Butler Island, as well as Hampton Plantation, which was a cotton plantation on St. Simon's Island. Major Pierce Butler was a founding father of the United States who fought in the Revolutionary War and helped draft and was a signer of the US Constitution. He was a powerful and influential man who amassed his wealth with rice and cotton cultivated and harvested by the Black people he enslaved. These men, women, and children did the backbreaking work of the plantation, and they were also skilled laborers like blacksmiths and wheelwrights, and they were all held in bondage by the Butler family. But it was one of his heirs, his grandson, Pierce Mease Butler, who would bring international notoriety to the family and their legacy. Pierce Mease Butler inherited the family fortune, but by 1859, he was deeply in debt. And to settle his debt, the family trustees auctioned off 436 men, women, and children on the auction block in Savannah in March of 1859. These were the people born on the Butler plantations on Butler Island and St. Simon's Island. They were a community and they were torn apart in an event that would become known as the Weeping Time. This was the largest single auction of human beings in US history. And it was an event that was covered by major newspapers in the North and fueled the momentum of the abolitionist movement. Four years later, the book Journal of a Residence on a Georgian Plantation was published in the United States and in England in 1863. It was an expose written by Pierce Mease Butler's ex-wife, the renowned British actress, writer, and abolitionist Fanny Kimball, who had been shocked and disgusted by the harsh treatment and living conditions of the people enslaved by the Butler family. And many historians believe that her book helped to bolster England's opposition to the Confederacy. So today, Butler Island is a heritage preserve managed by the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. And within the last year, it has made news again because of a Georgia House bill that would have allowed the sale of historic preservation sites, historic preserve sites in Georgia to private entities. So a coalition of Butler Island descendants and other organizations banded together to oppose that bill. To tell you more about that effort, we have invited Hermina Glass-Hill to share her remarks about that effort to preserve the Butler Historic Site. Hermina is a writer, a historian, and a preservationist, a sustainability advocate based in Midway in Liberty County, Georgia. She is the founder and director of the Susie King Taylor Institute and the 2019 recipient of a Georgia Governor's Award for the Arts and Humanities for her commitment to uplifting, sharing, and preserving African-American history and culture.
House Bill 906 here in Georgia was a bill that attempted to sell off 15 acres of property on the Butler Island Plantation, along with the Houston House. When I found out the information, I decided that I would work with a group of people who were interested in and passionate in saving Butler Island. What emerged was a coalition of diverse groups of people and organizations that worked diligently to kill House Bill 906. Today, this group is still meeting and working to strategize as to the way forward of Butler Island. Butler Island is critical to the history of our state, the history of our nation. The weeping time that occurred in Savannah actually began in McIntosh County. And so that property is extremely important in holding the stories, the memories of the people who live there and their descendants who continue to live there.
And I want to talk about a couple of resources that we'd like to highlight from the many that we have included in a guide that we're going to share with you later. One of those resources is glengen.com, and you're going to hear that mentioned a lot during our talks. It is a creation of Amy Hedrick. Amy is a genealogist and a founder of glengen.com, a website that we all rely on in this area in our research because of its thoroughness and objectivity in telling the story of Glenn County families. You will hear it mentioned a lot, and we want to acknowledge her work. Another resource we want to share with you is The Weeping Time, Memory and the Largest Slave Auction in American History by Ann C. Bailey. It was published by Cambridge University Press in 2017. And this book chronicles the families of Butler Island, and as well as the slave owners, as well as the enslaved, and the aftermath of the auction and the plight of the families that were sold. So let's jump into our presentations. Our first presenter this afternoon is Brian Sheffey. Brian will share his research into the origins of the enslaved people of Butler Island, and he also touches on Sapelo Island. Brian is the founder and a host of Genealogy Adventures Live and the author of Practical Genealogy, 50 Simple Steps to Research Your Diverse Family History, and Family Tree Workbook, 30 plus step-by-step worksheets to build your family history. So
hello everyone, can you see the screen okay? Okay, and I'm coming through okay. All right then. Hello everyone. Welcome to our afternoon talking about this very special place and this very special group of people. So my name is Brian Sheffey, and I'm going to be talking about Butler Island, Sapelo Island, and St. Simons, and the enslaved ancestral research that myself and a team of people have been doing. So a little bit about me. I'm a former advertising and marketing exec, record label exec, and a university lecturer. I'm lecturing in marketing and advertising. I am the founder of Genealogy Adventures and Genealogy Adventures Live. So Genealogy Adventures is a website that teaches people how to do genealogy research with an emphasis on African-American research and giving people tips and tricks on how to get through very stubborn brick walls, and especially tips and tricks and strategies for Black genealogists who are doing rather challenging genealogy. I'm also a genealogist, both paid and also working on my own family history. An author has been mentioned previously. I also consult with museums, especially if they're doing exhibitions about people that they want to highlight and promote. And I'm also a research project manager with a small team of researchers. Oh, and that was a picture of my parents. I always throw that up in presentations because I just kind of like to feel that they're around me. So before I get into the research that I've been specifically doing on Butler Island, there's a few people that I have to give a shout out to. So the first is my Irish cousin, Martine Brennan. Funnily enough, we actually figured out that we are DNA cousins. We're trying to figure out who our common ancestors were. But we know that it was probably an Irish person living in South Carolina, and that's about as much as we know at the moment. Martine was doing her master's dissertation in Ireland on the subject of Irish slaveholders or descendants of Irish slaveholders, Irish people who were slaveholders here in America. A huge debt of gratitude goes out to Antoinette Holmes, who has done a phenomenal job researching her ancestral line from Butler Island all the way down to Louisiana. She has generously shared her research, which has probably shaved a good 2 to 3 years off of the group project. So a huge, huge debt of gratitude to Annette for making her research public. Also, Stacey Ashmore Cole, in her wonderful site, they had names, African Americans, and early records of Liberty County, Georgia, and Callie Myatt, who has also been amazing. So basically the research that I'm doing, it's a huge project, and you'll get a sense of that by the end of this presentation. And I just wanted to start by giving you just a real quick whistle-stop tour of what I'm doing. So trying to break down a monumental task. This project has a lot of moving parts to it. So part of it is identifying the 440 people sold during the weeping time, which you heard at the top of this presentation, and also finding their descendants and their ancestors. Identifying the approximately 400 people who were not sold and still on Butler Island, and finding their descendants and ancestors. There's been a staggering amount of reading about the Butler family, and there's also some associated families. There's the Butlers, the Bulls, Middleton, Izzards, Guerards, and Brewerton families. Just a couple more in there, but those are the main ones. And researching the history of enslavement within the earlier generations of the Butler, Middleton, and Bull families of South Carolina, which is actually the origin story for many of the families who found themselves on Butler Island, St. Simons, and some in Sapelo. So, starting with identifying the 440 souls sold in 1859 during the weeping time. Some people may think that this isn't possible to do, but it is, believe it or not. A list of these people can be found via a wonderful website, via the Glenn County genealogical link, which you see on your screen now. There's also on the same site a list of people who weren't sold. And again, many of them actually had surnames, which made the whole research project much easier to do. Then we discovered that there was a whole group of formerly enslaved people who were living in places like Glenn County, McIntosh County, surrounding areas. We found an additional 7 family groups from both lists. As I said, most of them living in those parts of Georgia. Identifying the 440 souls who were not sold. Again, wonderful list can be found at the list can be found at this wonderful site and about the Glenn County genealogy. Reading a staggering number of Butler related family books and trawling through staggering amount of documents that comprise what's known as the Butler family papers. So in terms of a reading list, this is just a small snippet the reading that I've done, that other people on the project team have done as well. So there's Malcolm Bell Jr.'s one kind of renowned book called Major Butler's Legacy: 5 Generations of a Slaveholding Family. Francis Lee Butler's 10 Years on a Georgia Plantation, Fannie Kemble's book, which again was mentioned at the top of this presentation. She is the ex-wife of Pierce Mease Butler. It's called The Journal of a Residence on a Georgia Plantation, where she actually sat down and she wrote letters to a friend back in England that were never sent. And these letters were all compiled and they were published in book format. Fannie's book is a little bit controversial. Some accusations have been made because she and good old Pierce had a rather bitter divorce, that she made some stuff up, that some things were elaborated. I'm gonna kind of plug for Fannie because she does such a wonderful job in terms of describing the people that she spoke with, that she saw, even down to their occupations and kind of individual characteristics. It's a wonderful book. I just suggest that you read it, and you can see some of the other books on that list. So, as I've said, this was a monumental research project. It's still ongoing. We've been doing it for about 2 years now, maybe just a little bit over, and we've got many years left to go. But I thought it would be helpful to give you an idea of how I've decided to break this huge task down into kind of bite-sized, more manageable chunks. Because when we're doing this kind of research, it's just really easy to get incredibly overwhelmed. So this is just breaking down a monumental task. So, oh, sorry, I think someone's trying to page me. I'm gonna carry on. So there's 3 phases. There's the first Africans brought to South Carolina from Africa via Middleton and the enslaving importation firm, Middleton and Brailsford. I'm sorry, I am going to stop because does look as though someone's trying to get in touch. Okay. So phase 1 is actually the bit of the research that I'm focused on. That's taking up most of my time. So again, it's all about identifying the first Africans that were brought from Africa to South Carolina via Middleton and Brailsford. And then also researching people that Major Pierce Butler actually bought in Virginia and had shipped down to South Carolina. So those are the bits that I am focused on. Phase 2 is I'm also partially involved in this one, is compiling a family tree for the enslaved communities at Butler Island, St. Simons, and Sapelo Island, from the first Africans held by the Bull and Butler and Middleton families right up to 1859, the year of the Weeping Time sale. Phase 3 is extending that tree out much further. So taking what we did in phase 2 and basically finding the living descendants of all of these people. So just between those 3 phases, I hope you just start getting a little glimpse as to how involved this project is and all the moving parts that it has. Okay, now my computer is playing up. So I just wanted, before I get into what I'm doing, I just wanted to do a really quick tour of phase 2. So what's involved in something like building a family tree of an enslaved community in a very specific place? Part of what I'm going to say, Major Pierce Butler, the way that he had organized his plantations, they were very closed communities. He didn't really have people coming in from the outside. So once you were kind of enslaved by him and on Butler Island, you were part of a very closed community. And because he wasn't the kind of enslaver that regularly sold enslaved people, he had a fairly stable community of people on his property. So that is something that's kind of aided our research. But what's also involved in phase 2 is locating family wills, estate inventories, family lawsuits, because where you have enslaved people who are legally property, you're gonna have people fighting about it. So if Papa gave someone one more enslaved person than they had, there could be feelings about it and people had lawsuits. Also things like slave mortgages and insurance policies. People actually, if they were having financial trouble or their cash flow wasn't great, but they knew that they had money coming in the future, they would mortgage an enslaved person, also take out insurance policies on them. Also things like any kind of slave deed, slave sale related records, finding them and getting the information from those. Things like plantation farm books, day books, journals, letters, anything that had enslaved people's names on them are documents that we have either accessed or that we're trying to locate to learn more information. Other kind of documents, Major Pierce Butler's slave register pages covering the years 1775 to 1815, his lists of enslaved people who went away with the British, both during the Revolutionary War and during the War of 1812, although that group of people didn't actually leave until 1815. So between those two events, the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, Butler lost in the region of 700 to 800 enslaved people who went away. They went away with the British. They went to Canada, where some of them didn't like Canada, or they found life there very difficult. So some of his enslaved people ended up going to Liberia. Others went to Sierra Leone, and a smaller group of people went to Trinidad and Tobago, where I actually have DNA matches. That's the bit that I actually left out. Somewhere in this group of people, I have a DNA connection. So my mother's family is from South Carolina, part of it, in a place called Edgefield, which is all the way on the other side of the state from where Butler originally had these people. But the enslavers in Edgefield were buying their enslaved people from the Bulls, the Middletons, and the Butlers. So there is a connection there, trying to work out what that is. So Pierce Butler also had birth and death lists for his enslaved people, roughly covering the years 1800 to 1834. He documented the purchases and sales of enslaved people, also finding the weekly reports sent from his overseers both in South Carolina and Georgia, back to Pierce, who was living in Philadelphia. He's what we would refer to as an absentee enslaver. He very rarely ever went south. I guess he just really liked Philadelphia. So the burden of actually running his properties fell on his overseers. Probably the most famous of them are both Roswell King Sr. and his son, Roswell King Jr. Even things like notes about punishments meted out to enslaved people, those are the kind of documents that we're looking for because they have names. And that's primarily what we're looking for to understand how people are related to one another. And also understanding naming conventions that the enslaved people used. Doing this research, we see a lot of repeating names across multiple generations. Even people alive during the same generation had the same name. And those can be clues. So we're trying to work out how all the Cujos, and you can see on the screen the myriad of ways that one name is spelled. Women with the name Abba, spelled a couple of different ways. Kufi, Kwamina, Kwako, Kwash, those are just a handful. But in and of themselves, names can provide really, really good clues that you can work with. So now on to what I'm working on. In order to do what I'm doing, you kind of have to understand how enslaved people were, if they were kept within the family, were passed down the family line from generation to generation. And this is probably pretty good because we're almost talking about 5 generations of the Butler family specifically. So you have to track the movement of enslaved people from starting at the top, the first generations of enslavers, who then split their enslaved people amongst their children, who would be the second generation of enslavers, who then passed that down to their children. That's the third generation, and you can probably interpret the rest. It's really a funnel. And I'd like you to keep this image in mind because I'm going to show you a screen in a minute for Pierce Mease Butler, the grandson of Major Butler. And this very much comes into play. So this is the more traditional kind of family tree that you see, although I've chopped out a lot of people who aren't particularly directly relevant to this story. So this is showing the movement of enslaved peoples within the Butler family. So it starts with Captain John Bull at the top and his wife, Mary Branford. Now, John Bull was a large-scale enslaver, was a large-scale importer of Africans into South Carolina. He had a lot of daughters. So through him and Mary, we get connected to the Izard family and the Brewerton families, who also ended up having enslaved people who had descendants that were sold during the weeping time or were left behind on Butler Island. But the lady that I most focus on at the moment is called Mary Lucia Bull, their daughter. She marries Colonel Thomas Middleton. That's the Middleton of Middleton and Brailsford. And that's an enslaving firm that I really want you to try to remember that name, because we're going to be coming back to it in a couple of minutes. They in turn had a kind of largest family. So the woman that I'm going to really concentrate on is Mary Polly Middleton, which is just underneath Colonel Thomas. She ends up marrying Major Pierce Butler, who is an interesting character. He was Irish born, one of the younger sons of an Irish baronet who, Papa bought him a commission in the British military, and he traded on that when he came to the States. And he was very eager looking for rich heiresses to marry, and he got one in the form of Polly Middleton. They had a couple of children. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Pierce Butler was so disappointed in all of his sons that when he was preparing his probate and his will, he wouldn't leave any of his property to any of them. So he struck a deal with his grandchildren, and he said, if you take my last name Butler, you get the lot. And the bulk of his property ended up going to Sarah's children, John Mease Butler and Pierce Mease Butler. They basically took their biological surname, Mease, and made that into their surname. So when you're looking at Pierce Mease Butler, that's the gentleman behind that 1859 Weeping Time sale. And hopefully you can envision that funnel that starts with John Bull and Mary Branford and works all the way down those generations, so that huge bulk of people ends up with Pierce Butler. Should also note, Major Butler was a bit of a character, because he took a whole lot of enslaved people from South Carolina down to Georgia that he didn't have any business taking. They weren't his to take. They were actually his in-laws enslaved people, or were supposed to have been held by his children, but he wasn't supposed to have them. He didn't care. He ended up taking them down to Georgia. This is another way of showing that funnel. So again, you see John Bull, Mary Branford at the top, Pierce Mease Butler all the way down there at the bottom in the blue. And again, think of that funnel with all of, because again, this was a very large enslaving group of families, and a lot of their enslaved people ended up with him. So how do you start identifying first Africans that were actually brought to a specific location? You're going to need information about slave ships. Not particularly easy research, which I'll talk about in a minute. But to give you an idea, I was thinking I had the name Middleton and Brailsford. I did a lot of research about when they set up, where they set up, when they had offices, how many ships they hired to bring Africans into South Carolina. So I had a rough idea of how busy they were when ships were arriving, and I had a time period. I'm thinking, well, that was British. That was when South Carolina was a British colony. And then I got the idea, well, they had to sell these people. They had, these people were being sold at auction. They probably check out an advertisement. So lo and behold, thanks to a wonderful website called Accessible Archives, they have all of South Carolina's colonial era newspapers. And I found this was the very first advertisement that I found for Middleton and Brailsford actually announcing an auction of enslaved Africans. And this is pretty typical. On the images you see, I don't know why they're dressed that way, but that's, this is the 1753 newspaper edition. So you have African and I guess apparently African dress, advertisements to be sold on Wednesday. And again, that's the wonderful thing about genealogy. You have to tackle old writing. So you have to tackle everything from cursive writing, which can be challenging. This is 18th century writing where F's are written as S's, which can be a little bit confusing. And this is brilliant compared to what's called secretary hand. But to be sold on Wednesday, the 22nd, instant and not before, about 100 as healthy and likely Gambian slaves as was ever imported just arrived the ship Molly and Sally, Captain John Wilmhurst, Middleton and Brailsford. Those handful of words are actually packed with just genealogical gold information. It tells me roughly it tells me how many enslaved Africans were going to be sold. It tells me when they're going to be sold. It doesn't tell me where, but I know that this particular sale was happening in just outside of Charleston. It gives me the name of the ship. I'm going to come back to that because there's a wonderful website called slavevoyages.org where you can find out more information about every single slave ship that left Africa for all the Americas. So United States down to Spanish-held territory in South America. So I know it's the Molly and Sally. It gives me the name of the captain, John Wilmhurst, Englishman, split between Bristol and Liverpool, because you have to research all of this. And then, of course, Middleton and Brailsford. I'm going to say this was the first one that I found. This was the first kind of slave auction that I had ever found. It took me a couple of days to not a couple of days. It took me a couple of hours to kind of walk it off. I just had to step away from the computer for a bit, but I dove right back in. This is another example. So to be sold on Tuesday, the 9th of August, and this is 1757, 9th of August, about 240 healthy, likely Negroes, just imported in the Snow Liatus, Captain Ambrose Lace from Africa by Middleton and Brailsford. So again, did a lot of research on Ambrose Lace. He came from Liverpool. He ended up becoming a very wealthy, prominent citizen because of slavery. And what I'm also trying to do is to find the ship logs for these voyages and for these captains. That's kind of on my to-do list. And then basically what I do and what the team does is we add all of this information to a family tree on ancestry.com. And we use what's called the Beyond Kin methodology. And if you're not familiar with what that is, if you Google Beyond Kin Project, they also have a Facebook page, a Facebook group. It's a way for descendants of enslavers or people who have slavery-related documents can share them to the public. Which I kind of think is a form of reparations to do that, to allow us to stitch our slavery disrupted family trees together. So in this instance, what you see at the top, slave ship importations while in the Brailsford-Middleton partnership. That's kind of like the father. That's the father tag. And then the mother tag would be, it's associated with Colonel Thomas Middleton, because of the Middleton and Brailsford connection. And then underneath that, you see their children, which are each individual ship. Now, Middleton and Brailsford had roughly around 42 or 43 ships over its existence. And I've managed to find, I'm up to 32 now. So I found basically 32 of those ships. And I try to pack this with as much information as I can. So you can see, for instance, slave ship Delight. Middleton arranged that. 1760 voyage from Calabar, which is in Nigeria. It says about 160 Africans were aboard, actually disembarked from that ship. The captain of that ship was William Calhoun, and he is related to my Calhouns in South Carolina. And then I let people know that there's additional voyage details in the gallery section of this page on ancestry.com. And I do that, and the other researchers do that, so that one is to kind of spare us being asked a myriad of questions on ancestry, but two, it's to help other researchers. You know, it saves them time. They don't have to ask us questions and wait for us to reply to them. The essential bit of what they need to know is right there. And this is the Slave Voyages website that I was telling you about. So there it is. The name of the ship is slightly misspelled. It should be Lintet. But again, it confirms it was coming from Liverpool originally, then it went to Calabar, then it landed in Charleston. It gives the year 1757, and it confirms that Ambrose Lace was indeed the captain of the ship. And you click the right link, the site provides much more information about the actual voyage. So the voyage ID is just their database identifier, but everything else relates to the voyage. So it's, again, you have the name of the ship, you have the vessel owners, you have the flag that it flew under, construction years, the weight, the tonnage. I guess for a ship kind of aficionados, they can kind of work out how big the ship is and how many people could have actually been placed on board it. But it also, this was the interesting thing, that ship, that was it. Once it hit Charleston, it sank. So that's the information that's down at the bottom, that the ship never made it back to England. It confirms, like I said, the ship started in Liverpool, went to Calabar, ended up in Charleston, and it gives all the appropriate dates. The date when the voyage began, so you can work that out in your head. So this began the August the 6th. Because I have to remember the difference between American dates and dates everywhere else. So the 6th of August, 1756. It actually arrived in December of 1757. So it was a long old voyage. Crew, 40. Now this crew information and captain information can be very insightful and important, especially if you do a DNA test and you're seeing DNA results that don't quite make sense. Especially from, if we're talking this kind of time period. Because unfortunately, as much as I hate to say it, both captains and crew, I'll put it the polite way, took advantage of the enslaved females that were on board. So it was not uncommon for an enslaved African woman on a ship to come off that ship pregnant. So again, if you needed a smoking gun for possible paternity candidates, name of captain, name of the crew, do some research, and that might actually shed some light. This is where it gets a little bit heartbreaking. The total number of Africans that went on board that ship was 230. The number that came off in Charleston, 197. So that's a little bit rough. The other thing that I love about this website is it tells you exactly where it got this information from, which you can see with that little orange arrow down at the bottom. So that's something that I've chased up on. I've written to this organization asking for more information. Do they have any records associated with this voyage? Do they know anything about the ship log? And unfortunately, due to COVID, they're very understaffed at the moment, so there's a bit of a delay in communication, but they're fascinated by the project and being very, very helpful. As I was saying, a lot of this depends on finding the right records and records that we can use from Major Pierce Butler's papers, and collectively they're known as the Butler family papers. And they're held primarily at the Historical Society of Philadelphia. Unfortunately, this historical society has been impacted by COVID. It's largely run by volunteers. And as reluctant as I am to say it, I did write to them. I offered to pay them money to be able to digitize specific documents that the whole team needed for this research. They weren't particularly helpful, so I kind of gave up all hope until after COVID is done, so I could actually get up to Philadelphia to take a look for myself. Then out of, some kind of inspiration from above hit me, and I just decided to take another look, because it's not uncommon for duplicate sets of records to be held by another repository. And because I didn't get any kind of joy out of the Historical Society of Philadelphia, took another look and found a company called AMP Limited, who are English. It's an English company. And what AMP did is they took the roles that the Historical Society of Philadelphia did for the Butler family papers, and they digitized it. And they have now, they didn't make it free. It is expensive, but when I explained what I was doing, what the team was doing, and my connection to this group of people, bless their hearts, they actually, AMP gave me free access to the whole database for Pierce Butler and his papers for a month, and they're like, take what you need, just take it. So their support has been invaluable. So the things that I got from them were the plantation manager's correspondence from Georgia to Pierce Butler in Philadelphia. And again, that was coming from the King, father, and son. And this just gives a little description of kind of what's entailed in here. The one thing that I wasn't able to get, because they haven't been digitized, and I'm working with AMP to resolve this, was the last of the Butler, Bull, Middleton probate records that I need, that they have, especially the estate inventories that have details of the enslaved people. So this gives you a little idea of what you can find in one of the Roswell King's weekly reports that they were sending up to Philadelphia. So there's Sherman. He's a machine carpenter. There's Jacob, who also has something to do with, who is also a shipbuilder. And the wonderful thing about reading these accounts and getting an idea of what their lives were like, it takes these from being just names on a list, and it starts to turn them into 360-degree, three-dimensional people who lived, breathed, loved, hoped, hated, fought, had fun. And for me, that's the real kind of motivation behind genealogy. And having gotten to know this very special community of people, finding out these kind of information is just priceless. I mean, men like this, they had mad skills. They didn't just have skills, they had mad skills. They were talented, skillful people. And it was brilliant just to get that proof in just a little snippet like this that you see on the screen. There were other things like the 1797 list of people that were held on the main island in Georgia. And I treat these like they're census records, because in a way, that's kind of what they were. Basically, it's a record of enslaved people and how much they were worth. I chose to take another spin on it, and I just treat this like a census. And where Pierce Butler was maybe unusual is these were split out by family groups. So we have Peter and Melinda with their ages, and then we have their child Bob. And you think, well, there's not that much to go on here, but there is. You have the years that you can actually work out roughly the year that each one of these individuals was born. We have a document dated 1797. 1797 minus 22 is going to give you Peter's rough year of birth. And you can see with those little lines, if you look under Bob, you'll see two little hash mark lines. That's the end of that family group. The next family group starts directly underneath. So in a way, knowingly or unknowingly, Pierce made this kind of research much easier by keeping people within their family groups. Here's another list. These are our enslaved people that Pierce Butler brought from Virginia into South Carolina in 1780. And again, it lists their names. And this is kind of like another kind of census that he did. And again, everyone is kind of kept in their respective family groups. There are other research sources that are equally invaluable. So for instance, the people behind Middleton Place in South Carolina have been amazing. They've shared loads of information with me about the enslaved people that the Middleton family kept at Middleton Place, who are kind of cousins. Some of them are going to be cousins to the Georgia people. And again, just having that information has been wonderful, and vice versa. I found wills and probate records in estate papers that they didn't have. I found them elsewhere, and again, that's how genealogy should work. They've given me something, I've given them something. We've got an open line of communication. They're really excited about what I'm doing, and I'm trying to help them expand on their kind of exhibition space at Middleton Place. But again, we can see things like these Mary Bull Middleton 1760 estate inventory. That document I actually found on Family Search. So the only thing kind of holding me up at the moment are some crucial missing records. I'm hoping the cosmos is going to shower me with blessings and kind of start helping me find out where these things are. So things like the slave ship logs for the 31, 32 ships that I've found already. I've written to the British Museum. Unfortunately, they only have, considering the thousands of British ships that were involved in the slave trade, they only have 6 slave ship logs. So that was a strikeout, but they are looking. I know that they are quietly asking around and they're looking. They did tell me that most likely slave ship logs are held in private hands, and these are things that usually come up with at auction. And I kind of like to see legislation that says you can't sell stuff like that. If you have a slave ship log, if you have any document related to slavery, to kind of by law, if you don't want it, donate it to your local historical society, donate it to your local research, your state research library, donate it to the International African American Museum or the Smithsonian. Don't sell it, because that's our history. And I feel quite passionate about that. I'm looking for slave ship in South Carolina embarkation records. You just can't have a ship with like 200, 350 enslaved souls rocking up to Charleston, being disembarked. They're tax collectors, they're harbor masters. There have to be records. They may not have survived, but records were taken. I know, I lived in Britain for 30 years. I knew what the British are like. They are, I think only the Germans rival them in terms of administrative processes. So there were records taken. Also the Middleton and Brailsford slave auction ledgers. Remember, these are business transactions. And at these auctions, people would have paid X% up front, and then they would have paid a balance. So if you're Middleton and Brailsford, the only way that you're going to know who owes you money is if you have a ledger, receipts, pending. And I'm sure that in that list, they will have, the enslaved people will not have names. And again, even on slave voyages and the slave ship logs, they aren't going to be named. But at least I will have an understanding of how many men, women, male children, girl children, and infants there were on every single ship. And that kind of a breakdown makes it much easier for me to map people who were sold at auction. So being businessmen, being very successful businessmen, they would have had ledgers for each one of those auction sales. That'll tell me who bought the enslaved people and where they were, so then I can start looking for that person's probate records and slavery related records to, again, pick up the trail for the enslaved Africans. Also, sales ledgers for Joseph Bryan Jr. He was the auctioneer for the Weeping Time people. Again, same thing, business transactions. You're talking 440 people. There's no way you're going to remember 400, people. You're not going to remember all the names of the buyers. So he would have written that down, how much they paid, how much was owed. And then he would have had to have kept Pierce Mease Butler apprised of what the situation was. And he had to have done, because I think in today's money, that sale raised over $3 million. So that was a lot of money. And as I said, considering how deeply in debt Pierce Mease Butler was, he'd want to stay on top of that. Also things like missing Bull, Middleton, and Butler probate records. So that kind of gives you a little snapshot of what's still pending. And then this is kind of the tree that's been built out of the research that we've done already. So there's Mary Lucia Bowles. This is her estate inventory, which again, as a note to other researchers, I want them to know that that inventory is in her gallery on ancestry.com so they can access those documents. She broke her enslaved people into what's called lots. That's how she refers to them. And basically each of her children got a lot of enslaved people. And by a lot, I mean, I'm not talking number, I'm talking like lot 3, lot 2, lot 1, lot 4. So this one is her daughter, Sarah Guerard. This was just a tiny portion of the enslaved people that she got, but it just gives you an idea of the information that we put in. So for instance, there's Sonny Butler, his wife, Melinda, otherwise known as Linda, and their son, Evander, who actually ended up leaving with the British in 1815, going to Halifax, Nova Scotia. We've done a little bit of work on that, but that's going to be another phase. That's like either phase 4 or phase 5 to pick up their trail in Canada. Because crazy enough, Canada didn't start its first census until 1851. We're talking 1815. So that's 3 generations later. So that's got some challenges. You see Quaco, or Quaco, which is spelled more than one way. Any description that an enslaver puts in their probate, I put with the person on the tree. So I know that in 1760, when Mary died, Quaco was considered a man. So there's no point in thinking a 12-year-old named Quaco is going to be this guy, because he would be much older. But taking a look at the screen, this kind of gives you a general sense of how that information's been added. And again, we've been using the Beyond Kin methodology to get these people into the tree. Because actually, once you figure out what their family groups are and you put them as a family underneath their enslaver, it is so much easier to actually do research on them. And that's it. That's kind of my whistle-stop tour of a large project with many, many moving parts. And I hope you found that interesting.
I am so honored and excited to be talking with Tiffany Young about her family and her connection to Butler Island Plantation. Tiffany.
Yes.
All throughout the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor, there are people who are the culture keepers. Every island, every community, and I think probably that's true of communities everywhere, that there are people who hold on to the family history, who fight to preserve it. And I see you as one of those people. And I've been wondering, what was it that sparked your interest in learning about your history, and not only just learning about it for yourself, but sharing it with other people and encouraging other people to connect to it?
Well, first of all, I was steeped in our culture unknowingly until probably about middle school. I realized that I was a little different, and what we do and how we eat, sing, live, believe traditionally was distinctively different from my peers. So of course that triggered interest. And then my grandfather used to tell me all these stories, and then other elders, my grandmother. So that's what got me interested in doing our genealogy and learning about who we are. And after that, I found that I'm a direct descendant of the Hampton Plantation, where my family is the King, or descendants of the King, notoriously line, for several generations, 5 generations specifically, from South Carolina, the Bulls, Middletons, and the Gerard family, Gerard, or Gerard, however you like to pronounce it. we descended there and then ended up at Butler, or at Hampton Plantation on St. Simon's Island specifically. And then I found out all these different things, why we are who we are and why we do what we do and what makes us so unique and so different.
And what is the reason why? What is the reason why your culture is so unique?
Well, because we have brought our culture over from through the Middle Passage. We survived that, and we made it and sustained our culture since. Tidbits at this point. I was born in 1980, so I have remnants of the culture that are still very different from my friends. But that's why we're different. We have our traditions. We hold our traditions from several different cultures, several different tribes. And it's a collaborative of tribes that created what people call or refer to as Gullah Geechee today, or your culture, or whatever you want to call it. That's who we are, and that's why we're who we are. We've maintained that, and we're still trying to hold on and maintain it today.
I've met people, African-American people, who have no interest in learning about the plantations where their ancestors worked. You know, they want to turn away from that and look forward. But for me, I can't even imagine being able to walk on the ground where your ancestors walked. You know, and you have that opportunity. And so many people in this who are from this area have that opportunity to literally walk on the ground that their ancestors toiled on. How does that make you feel?
It is an honor, first of all, and a privilege. In a way, just to be able to go through that journey. For me, it is an honor and a privilege. Going back, it was like a Sankofa for me personally to go back through that and continue all the way back to the various countries where we all descend from. Like you said, everybody doesn't have that goal or that interest, but learning about where my people were enslaved and seeing those places, it gave me strength. It empowered me to see that who I descended from and who I am now, the remnant of that is just undescribable. That's how it feels. Mm-hmm.
Of all the ancestors that you've learned about in your research, is there one in particular that has inspired you?
Mm-hmm. Tunis Campbell.
Okay.
Yes. I'm just saying. So yeah, I'm somewhat of yeah. So Tunis was my inspiration, and yes, because I believe that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we can do it again. Yeah.
Right. Were there any surprises that you encountered as you learned about your family history?
Yes, many.
Oh, you got a list.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for that question. So yeah, surprises, mainly just learning about what we went through. You know, the torture and the anguish that we really went through, like women being forced to have 16 and 20 babies and being interbred for generations. It was just unfathomable to me, you know, seeing women being suspended from their thumbs and whipped with horse whips, and then raped and exiled on 5 Pound Island, which is on Little St. Simon's Island. Those things were just, you know, I don't know, just confusing and baffling and disturbing. Also finding out, let's see, that some of our family members were of the Yoruba tribe, of the Mandingo tribe, of the Akan tribe. Just being able to recently find out, like some names that were recently mentioned, I believe by Mr. Brian, Quaco, Kofi, Kwamina, Coffee. Those were names that we realized with another genealogist and historian recently, that those are all Ghanaian names, and we have a naming pattern, and seeing that naming pattern also on Butler and throughout the generations of Butlers, slave legacy, or however you would like to put it. We kept those naming patterns, different naming, like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, or January, February, March, and then some of them kept these names that were very tribal and traditional. So my family did it. My family, I descend from Brister or Bristol, and for 5 generations, Bristol was a driver for Roswell, for the Butler family plantation. So we kept that name. The men did that so that we can keep up with who we were. We knew we weren't going to be sold outside of the plantations, but maybe moved around. Butler to St. Simon's was a little hike. So in case we were relocated, the men were very, very particular about maintaining that name. And for some reason, Bristol was important. So those things were surprising to me, just a few little things. Mm-hmm.
It's almost like our ancestors were leaving us clues for the future, for the future
absolutely.
family.
Absolutely.
To know who they were, isn't it?
I agree. Absolutely.
I think this is our first time talking in a conversation one-on-one, but I've been following you from afar on Facebook and through the newspaper. I know that you have a project called the Heritage Trail Tour that you do.
Mm-hmm.
Want to tell us a little bit about that and why that's important to you?
Oh, absolutely. Well, because I have been preserving and researching our history at Butler for over a decade now, alongside Miss Annette Holmes, the Weeping Time descendant, it's very important to tell the story and to make sure it's accurately told by us. Knowing and doing the research, it has given me an opportunity to get a very personal relationship with my ancestors, not just knowing the folklore, but to know their names and to see their infirmary records and the things that they went through, at Butler and at Hampton Point, kind of made me just have more of an affinity for telling the story myself. So I created 10 years ago, the gathering of Butler descendants at Butler and at St. Cyprian's and at Ebo's Landing and at Sapelo to collaborate efforts with Culture Day, actually. That's how it started when Miss Cornelia Bailey was still alive, God rest her soul. And
another culture keeper.
Well, she was one of my mentors. We'll talk about that later. And so yeah, that's why it's important to make sure that I accurately tell our story. Miss Cornelia used to tell me when I was first on this journey, girl, go find your people. You're different. Go find your people. And when I did, she took me under her wing and made sure I was secure. I was always at Culture Day. I was referenced by her. And for us, that's a really big thing because there's not a lot of elders and people, as you know, that care and want to preserve, or that even have that calling. They don't allow you to just come around and do things anyway. You got to be called to be in that position and to do what we do anyway. So realizing when she passed on my birthday 2 years ago, I didn't take that lightly after she had mentored me all that time. I understand exactly what was going on, and that's very serious. I take it very serious. She's became an ancestor. I was mentored by Mr. Charles Jordan, who just passed away a week ago. And I'm still mourning him. So, he gave me his mother's recipes, Miss Ellen Jordan. And these are names you guys probably don't know. These people aren't Googleable, but they're very important to us. They're very sacred to us and dear to us. So the charge to keep is high. It's not a fad or a thing you go through. It's a lifestyle. You have to commit to doing it. So that's why that's important to me. The Heritage Trail Tour is a life. It's my life. It's me telling my ancestors' story, accurately telling it. So I do river tours, 4-hour river tours, and I do 90-minute walking tours at Butler. So anybody interested, you just Google me. I'm a geechigriot@gmail.com. Shout me out. I'll take you on down. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I knew Cornelia as well, and I'm not a Gullah Geechee descendant. I married into a family from Sapelo Island, but I noticed that she always had to walk, or it seemed to me, I should say, that she walked a fine line between sharing her culture and also keeping it close, so that people couldn't exploit it or put out misinformation about it, so to speak. And but she always made people feel like this is something I want you to experience, but at the same time, I want you to respect it. How do you find that balance of sharing who you are and your family with people and encouraging people to know the story, but also, protecting it at the same time?
Well, I'm still trying to balance that stick, because yeah, she was very adamant about protecting and who to talk to and who not to talk to. I would say I've been in a couple of books, involving Butler, including The Weeping Time, Dr. Ann Bailey,
Right.
and Wandering on Strange Lands. Oh God, Morgan Jerkins, and she talked about us at Butler and Sapelo. And so those things, I've missed a few opportunities, I would say, or I didn't want to do it. Henry Louis Gates Jr. came and wanted to do another book on Butler. And I said, well, I didn't really like his approach. So for me, I gave up the opportunity, and I like him. Initially, he was one of the people I used to really have an affinity for, but the way that went, I just, sometimes you eat the fish and spit out the bone, like the old people tell you. That's all we can do. So and now that the ancestors are dying, the baton is surely in our hands. So we cannot waver our culture. We can't risk any of that for anything. Fanfare is the worst. Money is not going to work. We're not for sale. I'm not. So that's, I'm definitely not one of those that's going to go for the next high dollar or the low dollar, so that's just, we're not a for sale culture. We want to bring awareness to our culture and maintain the dignity, respect, and integrity. And that's a very high charge to keep for anybody.
Right.
Yeah.
You definitely have to do what you feel comfortable doing. Are there any brick walls or challenges that you've encountered in researching your family?
Not in researching per se, but in preserving.
Okay, tell us about that.
Yeah, so preserving. So first of all, we have to preserve our land, right? That's the biggest thing. Well, one of the big things. Our lives is bigger. So we need to preserve our land, maintain our communities, maintain our ways of life. All of these things are targeted though, strategically. And we find ourselves losing for lack of jobs in the corridor at large, all the way from South Carolina to Florida. I'm sorry.
Florida.
The whole corridor suffers that same stuff. Without the jobs, people are moving away. So the culture is watering down. We're losing our culture. We're losing our heritage. We're losing our inherited lands. We're just, for the lack of the knowledge, we are losing. Period. Just people. Period. So no tourism, no jobs, no help, no sustainability. People are moving, scattering. So this is one of the big issues that I'm seeing. If I bring knowledge and bring awareness, we need to stay in our own and maintain our own communities. So that's a frustrating thing, and not everybody can sustain themselves, or not everybody is in tourism or in they don't have a farm, and if they can't sustain themselves, then what are they going to do? They just feel like it's easier to move out and find work somewhere else. And so our communities are dwindling down. So that's why our language is going. That's why our heritage corridor is dwindling. As you know, Sapelo, it used to, I don't know if you went to Culture Day before, it was so different,
Yeah.
and so we're losing so much of who we are. It's hard to hold on. It's like the sand in your fingers. It's just going away, slowly but surely. So that's one of the biggest problems that I'm finding right now. Yes.
So what do you think people can do to help? What do you see? Well, let's look at it from two different perspectives. What should people who are from the culture, from the islands and the mainland communities do? And what do you think people who are not of this culture can do to help preserve it?
I think that us as a community and natives should maintain our unity, and try to stay unified. Keep the unity by all means necessary. That's another big thing, lack of unity. But if we can get on one accord and build something together, I think that would is the best shot that we have as a community and a we can be our own collaborative. Outsiders can always bring, other tourists, bring volunteers, pray, whatever you can do. I don't know, make a donation of whatever. You might have a wood company and you can donate some wood where we can refurbish one of the old homes or help somebody in the community. It doesn't always have to be monetary. You can, maybe you got some fishing rods or something, you want to help us. We need fishing rods. We like to live off the land. We need some seeds and, things that are, I'm really serious. Some hay, for the cows, anything for the farm, some farm equipment, those type of things. We can always use a tractor. Don't donate that. You might not have the money. You got a whole tractor, we'll take it. So, those are things that we need to maintain our individuality, maintain our culture, and sustain who we are, and be self-sufficient, and do that without, we don't really like, I know personally, Butler descendants, we don't really like a whole lot of help. We're not looking for, we can do what we have to do. We're capable. That's why they came and got us, because we were totally capable of building the whole thing, and we did it, and we lived. And you see the product. So you see, we are capable. We just need to sustain ourselves. A little support is all we need. Yeah. Okay.
All right. I hear you. So what would you like to see happen with the Butler Island site? If you had all the money in the world and all the resources in the world, what would you envision for
A
that?
collaborative, a place that we could, a collaborative for Butler and Hampton and St. Simon's, a collaborative for all of, really everybody in the lower country, the low country, just to come there and be able to bring all of their gifts and their treasures and their knowledge, and bring a place on the mainland, because Sapelo is all type of different ways you got to get there. It's not as easy. You got to be invited most of the time anyway.
That's true.
So it's sacred. I don't have to be, I go anytime I want to, and I love it. But, you have to, that's a sacred place. So you need a place on the mainland to be able to get the bulk of the support. So I envision that. That's what I think would be a good idea for all of us. Mm-hmm.
Are there any final words you'd like to say about your family, about your research before we wrap up?
Well, pretty much, I think we've gone over everything. You guys are aware that I'm a direct descendant. I have been doing the research and preserving. I offer the tours. I do the gathering of descendants every year. I've worked with everybody from Griffin Lotson and the Shouters to the McIntosh County Shouters to the whoever, and Terri, just anybody who's in preservation there and of any relevance, whether what shade they are, I have worked with them, and I love working with them. It's a very moving experience. So I'm just here for the knowledge. Anybody want to know anything, I'm here. If you need a tour or you need a book, some book writing help, and some reference, I got you. I'll take you down and show you around and give you a tour and invite you to the corridor because we need the support, and we do want to spread knowledge about who we are, and we're not just a pack of people in the backwoods. It's a wealth of information here, honey, a treasure trove of information, and it's beautiful. It's a scene you have never seen. Yes, a beach. We have our own beaches. Have you ever imagined in Georgia? I know you haven't. So come on down and let me show you. You can eat the seafood. We cook well. I know about the music, the old time music, the foodways, the waterways, any kind of ways you need to go. We have you. So you bring yourself and come join we, as the elders say. Come on.
All right.
That's it. I'm finished. Now close up.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, for sharing your story, and thank you so much for the work that
was all right, y'all.
Culture. We appreciate you. We look forward to your participation in our question and answer session at the end of our program. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
I think we're going to go straight into our Q&A. And then after we're done with the Q&A, I'm going to wrap up with a little bit of housekeeping to remind you where you can find some of the links to resources and also to thank our many wonderful sponsors that have helped to make this possible by spreading the word about this event. So I'm going to turn the floor over to, let's see, Adolphus, to see if he has any questions for us from our viewers that we didn't get answered. Some of the questions we've been answering in the comments as they come up, because we have people in our audience who are very knowledgeable about local history and genealogy, and they've been able to answer some questions, I'm sure. But what do you have for us, Adolphus?
Well, I think the first one is a question, I think, from Brian's section, and I apologize if I mispronounced, but it looks like Dr. No. His question was, which family owns the land patent for St. Simon's Island or Butler Island, if known?
I think that's actually a question for Tiffany.
Would you repeat the question? I was just, my face was probably.
Okay, and the question is coming from Dr. No. Which family owns the land patent for St. Simon's Island or Butler Island, if we know it?
Butler Island is owned by DNR, state of Georgia. St. Simon's is owned by Hampton. It's $1 million estate. It's a gated community. So multi-million-dollar people, a bunch of millionaires own it. And actually just for some tidbits, there are some slave dwellings in the back of 2 people's houses that I have taken people on tours to. If he's interested, tell him to DM me.
Okay, well, Tiffany, since we're with you, here's one more question. It looks like Daria Clark, hopefully I'm not butchering her name, but Ms. Clark's question is there a website for us to book your tours?
No, but I'm on Facebook. I'm almost have a Rolodex. But anyhow, you can get me on Facebook, or you can email me at geechigriot or griot@gmail.com. Geechigriot or geechigriot on Facebook. That's as good as I have, sweetie. Or I can give you my phone number.
Don't do that, Tiffany. And I should point out, if there are any questions that we can't answer today, we will definitely research them, because we love to do that, and we will get back to you. Any more questions, Adolphus?
Yeah, another question from the chat. Hopefully I'm not butchering the name again. It looks like Maurice Holly. And the question is, what is the King Project that Brian mentioned? The King Project.
Oh, there isn't a King. I mean, we're researching the King family because of their association with the Butler family. Primarily because it looks as though there was some, and Tiffany can probably speak, and Terri can speak more about this. There was a bit of an overlap. Even though they were enslaved by 2 different families, they were, how do I want to put this? They were mingling. The 2 populations were kind of friendly. So I don't know, Tiffany, do you have any?
I can just chime in just a little piece. You know, I'm a King descendant, just a little bit. But anyhow, yeah, we were enslaved at Butler's place, at Butler's location. But you know, Roswell King fathered at least, we know, 60 mulatto babies. So that's gonna be a little tricky, you know. Now, and then you have the Clint Kings that were not mulatto, who just took his name up because we felt it was a prestigious name. I didn't have anything to do with that, but they didn't ask my opinion, but they chose the name, you know, for us, and that's what we riding on, the Kings.
All righty.
Now, I am aware that I believe the Butlers actually.
Terri, you have muted.
I think I'm back, right?
You're back, yes.
Okay. I didn't mute myself, but I do believe I read somewhere where Roswell did purchase a couple of former Butler slaves before moving to Roswell with his family. And as Tiffany pointed out, there were 2 generations basically, and several children fathered between the 2 men.
All right, Adolphus, any more questions?
Yeah, a question from the chat. It looks like it's coming from Sean Whitney Jones. Are there still plans to build an African American museum on Butler Island to house the history of enslavement in that area?
Yes, not build, but to create. That's what we're in the process of that now.
Is that like an idea that you're exploring, or?
That's an idea that came out of Bill 906, and what we need to create something to do at Butler before somebody else does. It's just a sense of urgency. We can't be relaxed.
We'll stay tuned.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another question from the chat from Daria Clark, it looks like. Is the assumption that all Geechee came from the Butler family, or are there one more prominent families involved?
Geechee is a culture. Geechee is not one family. So Gullah is everybody from South Carolina. Geechee is Georgia and Florida. That's it. It's just like a tribe, like, you know, our tribal name or the title. Terri?
I've heard different things, and so I don't have a solid answer for you, but I've heard different things in terms of who is actually Gullah, who is actually Geechee, and they'll flip, you know, definitions. So I can't really address that as well as you can.
In my Cornelia Bailey voice, we all saltwater Geechees. Now you better hush.
No, I have heard that, and she told me that she made a distinction between saltwater and freshwater.
Absolutely. So
exactly.
That's what she
you're
said.
on the other side. If you're from Harris Neck, you're a freshwater Geechee.
Exactly. So the saltwater Geechees, but that's not just Butler. That's not Butler. That's everything.
Right.
So yeah, saltwater Geechees. We're just saltwater people. That's all.
Yeah. It's actually all the barrier islands from North Carolina down to Jacksonville, and then like about 30 miles inland on the mainland are considered the Gullah Geechee Heritage Corridor.
The actual property that was supposed to be distributed through the Freedmen's Bureau.
Oh yeah,
that's a whole nother show.
Yes.
Well, we'd love to do it. We would love to do it, right, Terri?
Yeah. Oh, we're gonna get to it all at some point.
Okay.
And one thing,
well, I have a question.
One thing coming from the chat that I want to point out in terms of the Facebook group about the descendants of enslavers sharing information. Martine Brennan, all the way from Europe, was nice enough to respond. Is the name of the project is the Beyond Kin Project. So if you Google the Beyond Kin Project, you should be able to get some information on that particular group that's sharing information.
Right. The Beyond Kin Project is an initiative that helps people document the enslaved people that were living on plantations, that are mentioned in wills, that show up in a variety of documents. It helps you put them into the family tree so that you can track them. And sometimes you can track them as a hashtag on a slave inventory all the way through a probate, will and into freedom. So it's just a way to keep track of that. So it's an awesome tool. Well, I have a question, Adolphus, if I can cut in. I wanted to ask Brian, because I listened to your recorded version of your presentation, and I noted the emotion that you had when you talked about encountering advertisements for slave sales for the first time, or ones that were relative to your work for the first time. So can you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
I'm not muted, am I? No.
No, you're good. I hear you.
When I saw that first one, and I'd been researching for nearly 25 years before I saw that advertisement. So, I mean, I'm used to estate inventories and wills and whatnot, and seeing families broken apart. But that really hit me because, especially as I knew how many people had died in that voyage, it just, for whatever reason, that just really hit me as a gut punch. And I really did have to walk away from my computer for a couple of hours and just kind of shake that off. I was imagining, I'm not saying that one of my ancestors was on that ship, but obviously I had enslaved African ancestors who were on ships, and I just felt it. I just felt what it was like to be torn away from the village that you had grown up with in your family, taken to a port, boarded on a ship, surrounded by death, and then in a land that you didn't know anything about, didn't even really know what was going to happen to you. And it did. It really hit me. And I like to think I'm kind of made of tough stuff. Um, but like I said, the only way I can describe it is in that moment, I felt something. I can't even describe what that something was, but it was really deep and it was really profound, and it just got me right there in the heart.
Mm. I know that feeling whenever I come across a document or a photograph or something. It is an emotional moment.
Mhm.
And if you're doing research all the time, like all of us are, you have that feeling a lot.
Yeah.
Where you touch history and you feel it.
And the odd thing is, it's not the first time I had come across that. I mean, I have European ancestors that were scooped off the streets of Glasgow, Edinburgh, Bristol, London, basically literally kidnapped, boarded on a ship, and sent over to the colonies, kids.
Mhm.
And that's gut-wrenching. But it was the scale of this that I think was also a factor in it.
Mhm. All right, thank you. Adolphus, any more questions?
I've been just responding to them at this point. So if you want to go and hit your next one, I'll even pull up a question in just a second.
Well, I have questions I want to ask Terri, but I don't want to give away her presentation that we're going to air later. But I do want to ask you, Terri, about you have a ton of documents that you had in your presentation when I saw it earlier. How do you organize your work? How do you organize what you find? Because I know you, and I know you have a ton of stuff. We're talking about someone, and I'll just tell our audience that Terri and Adolphus actually went to the National Archive and photocopied all the pension records for the people who were living on Sapelo Island. I think I'm telling that right. And it was like, you guys are devoted. And I'm just wondering how you organize your papers. I know how you can do it on the computer, but how do you organize your papers? Unmute, Terri.
I learned a lesson, and I do have a slide in my presentation to warn people to keep a research log and start to organize their information, because they are going to do a lot of surfing. They're going to run into things early on that make no sense, and then you'll have that aha moment a year or two later, and then you can't find it. So I've had a couple of computer crashes. I can just encourage you to back up, find a system that works for you, stay consistent with it. And again, we've got the cloud. So again, just be careful early on, start using some good techniques, and keep track of things, because when you lose it all, it takes a while to get back. I'm still actually sorting through a vast number of records to make them easier to access.
All righty.
Well,
All right, Adolphus. Oh, Brian, you have a question.
I have a question, either for Tiffany or Terri, or both. So again, in the course of the research, finding out that Africans were being brought, at least the ones that were taken from South Carolina to Georgia, they were coming from many different parts of Africa, mainly Nigeria, but some of the coastal places as well. How did these disparate groups, ethnic groups of Africans, actually build this wonderful, vibrant community?
Do you want to start, Tiffany, or should I take it?
Go ahead. I'll come behind you. Go ahead.
Well, I'm a linguist by training, and it's interesting how languages develop. But we do know that Gullah developed principally because they couldn't really communicate with each other. And one thing that I kind of missed out on when I was in college, I actually had a teacher who was very passionate about African language and linguistics. And I remember a chapter in which he was making a big, he made a big presentation, and he was pretty much hoping that somebody would take up a paper to study it. And again, I didn't know my history well enough at the time to realize that it was relevant to me, because I would have, and I could have actually gone out there and actually taped people. I am related to cousin Mary Moran, which she is actually passing along one of the oldest songs that connects the Gullah community in the United States to Sierra Leone. So they always found a way. That's what's one thing when it comes to, groups of people that are haphazardly thrown together like that. Again, they're cut off from their family. They have to make these new connections, and they'll do it by any means necessary.
Did you want to add anything, Tiffany?
Of course, I agree with her. I agree with her totally. But it kind of reminds me of the Tower of Babel in the Bible, where everybody's tongues were mixed and they had to figure out a way to communicate with each other. I want to just read. So I started writing an alphabet book, Brian, for kids in the language. Can you see this?
Just the top of it. Oh, there it is. Yes.
Oh, the New
See what it
Testament.
is. I'm gonna just read one little verse out of Mark 12, verse 9, just one little sentence. And it's in, of course, the language, Gullah. It says, Jesus left they and gone to they Jew meeting house. And I'm gonna say it in our language. Jesus left them and gone to their Jew meeting house. And see, that's what he was saying, that he was saying that Jesus left and went to their meeting house or went to their temple. But he referred to, Igbo people believe that I know I'm Igbo, but we believe that we're from the tribes of Israel, descendants of Israelites of Israel. So we would be those Jews that they are talking about. But anyway, we respected each other's culture. We loved each other. We knew how to stay divided and amongst each other at the same time, because we're all we had, So we just ate the fish and spit out the bones. You had Yoruba with Igbo. You had Yoruba with Mandingo. You had so many different big tribes that had to blend together. They had no choice. You were kidnapped in a place you had no choice but to make something beautiful. And look at who we are. That's exactly how we did it. Magnificently.
And I keep wondering how the established population on Butler Island felt about these people coming in from Virginia. Because although we haven't really researched them, I'm going to work under the premise that maybe the ones that were coming from Virginia, their families had been enslaved here longer. Just because it's Virginia.
Yes.
How they felt about leaving Virginia behind, going to, they may not have ever met an authentic, I don't want to say authentic African, like a first generation African
I understand.
that was brought to
Well,
Georgia.
I had actually read accounts where I heard that, say, the older enslaved would have an issue when the newer Africans would come, because they couldn't relate. They would have been here maybe 2 or 3 generations prior. And then, the slaves would go through a seasoning period. But, and especially, this really is a problem when the Wanderer, actually, the last slave ship came through. We had so many people that had been here now for like several generations that they couldn't even relate to the group of Africans that were imported in. So interesting enough. The other thing to point out, especially as it concerns Saplo, when they Spalding managed to buy Bilali Muhammad, it's noted that he spoke at least 5 languages. Brilliant man. And again, makes you kind of wonder in terms of how they're depicted in the news as being backward and having no culture and, essentially ignorant. But he spoke 5 languages. And the Gullah language that we know today, basically what was interesting, or what I found interesting in my classes, is that, some people would want to push it into a group as, say, Black English or Ebonics. It actually has syntax and a grammar, just like any other European Romance language. So that was kind of surprising how they work through and come up with a uniform language that they all understood. But again, you are looking at people that are enslaved by Frenchmen, Portuguese, Spanish, later German. So, they were exposed to a number of people, and they just found ways to incorporate, these words and come up with a consistent language. It's really kind of amazing. Another thing I want to point out, because they are actually looking at basically Black Hispanics from Mexico. They're finding evidence of Gullah in some of their, all the way out in Mexico. And this can only be explained by basically when they started driving out the Native Americans into the West. A lot of Black people, African descent, were actually living among the Seminoles and the Muskogee and all of them. So as they got pushed out, they took their culture and language with them. So it really is amazing how language is transferred, and again, how we all find a way ultimately to communicate.
Okay, this is Adolphus with another question from the chat. I'm going to push this one to Michele first, and then I'll probably follow up if no one wants to jump in. It's coming from Sean Whitney Jones. Do any of you know the family connection of our brother Ahmaud Arbery, rest in power, has to Sapelo Island?
Yes, he is a Sapelo Island descendant. I don't want to go into the details about that because I'm not, I don't know for sure the exact family connection, and I don't want to do that here without having some documentation to support that. But yes, he is a Sapelo Island descendant.
Yes, he is. And I agree with Michele. This might not be the proper forum at this time, to discuss that, especially without prior notice, to the family. But
Right.
Again, he is from Sapelo.
We can all acknowledge that at least. That's it.
Yes.
Yeah, the only other thing that I will add in terms of showing the breadth of the connections, he has connections to Sapelo Island. He also has connections to Harris Neck, Georgia. So there are two critical areas, but at some point, hopefully we can, after permission from the family, we can potentially share some of that information, because he and his family have deep roots that go all the way back to the beginning for the names that people are mentioning now.
Mm-hmm.
His DNA represents what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions, Adolphus?
I think that there is another question, but it's specifically a DNA question. So I'll try and hold that one so I can potentially circulate it amongst the group for potential feedback. And again, this is a question coming from Patricia Johnson. We see it, we acknowledge it, but we may not have time to dig in, because this definitely is going to take some reference back to census records and potential database queries.
Okay. Well, with that said, I'm going to attempt to share my screen again to put up our list of supporters, because I do not want to end the day without acknowledging them. Bear with me. There's Brian. That's not who I'm trying to show. Okay. These are all of our sponsors for today, and I hope we did not leave anyone out, because we had people joining up to the very last moment. But Genealogy Adventures, of course, that's Brian Sheffey. The Geechee Griot or Griot, that's Tiffany. The Susie King Taylor Women's Institute and Ecology Center, the Center for Jubilee, Reconciliation and Healing. GlenGen.com, that's Amy Hedrick, and we thank you, Amy, for all of your hard work. They Had Names, which is our illustrious technical gurus website, which documents the enslaved and early African Americans of Liberty County. That's Stacy Ashmore Cole that's done that. And then we have the Burning of Darien Museum, the Robert S. Abbott Race Unity Institute, the Ashantilli Center up in McIntosh County, Bess Richardson African Diaspora Literature and Culture Museum in Tampa, and the Bullock County Genealogical Society. But we especially want to thank Stacy Ashmore Cole for all of her hard work behind the scenes. She's with the Coastal Georgia Genealogical Society, and she's done so much to help make this program possible. And we hope to have more programs in the future. Hopefully with time, we'll iron out some of these technical issues that we've had. And we want to thank our speakers, Brian, Terri, and Tiffany. Terri, we look forward to having you back
I
to
can't
share
wait.
your presentation. It's awesome. And we thank you so much. Look for our links and information about all the resources we talked about on our website and on Facebook. And we hope you have a good evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
guys.
Blessings, everybody.